So welcome. I hope you're all energetic and look forward to talking and collaborating and sharing ideas and moving forward. We will be a little bit disciplined about asking everybody to speak with the mic, and we will circulate it because there are people online, and I welcome those people as well. But it gives me great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker today, John F. Crowley, who is the president and CEO of the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, which we know as BIO, the premier biotechnology advocacy association representing biotech companies, pharmaceutical leaders, and state biotech associations in the United States and for more than 35 countries around the world, really speaking for the multidisciplinary, multinational work that we all do. He is a longtime BIO board member, having founded and been executive chairman of Amicus Therapeutics, a global biotech company formed to develop treatments for rare genetic diseases, and served as CEO of Amicus from 2005 to 2022. You will hear shortly about why he rose to this effort, and he's become a very strong, or is and has become a very strong supporter of policies that enable innovation, enable entrepreneurship, and put people and patients first. That comes from lived experience with biotechnology, stemming from the diagnosis of two of his children with Pompé disease, which I must say probably pivoted his life and life work. He attended the U.S. Naval Academy and went on to earn a BS in Foreign Service from Georgetown, a JD from the University of Notre Dame, law school, and an MBA from Harvard. He's been profiled with his wife many, many times, and has the pleasure of making a cameo appearance in a 2010 major motion picture, Extraordinary Measures, that really was built upon his extraordinary experience. So with that, let me invite you to play a little clip which will anticipate his comments, and we welcome you to the stage. Thank you.
In both kids, it's the heart that's the real threat to their lives.
How much more time do we have?
I wish that we had a drug to treat Pompé, but we simply don't. I'm sorry.
Dr. Stonehill.
Yeah.
This is John Crowley. All the researchers say that you're a genius on the verge of a scientific breakthrough.
I'm not on the verge of anything.
How much would it take to prove your theory? I promised him that we'd raise 500.
That's all?
1,000.
Is it 500 or 1,000?
500,000.
Are you totally insane?
Apparently.
Figure any dude in a business suit can help me raise venture capital and run the company, but who's going to be half as motivated as a dad who's trying to save his own kids?
Do you have a wife?
Ex-wives. 2 of them.
How come?
Because I'm so easy to get along with.
We can do this. We push ourselves. We work around the clock.
I already work around the clock.
Great. Cure diseases in theory, but never help a single human being in reality.
I can't cure your kids, you know that, but I think I can save their lives.
You're in clinical trials by the end of the year, or we pull the plug.
Nobody is going to tell me how to run my lab.
We're out of time.
Are you crazy? You've jeopardized your chances of ever getting your kids treated.
You remember you told me that I should stop chasing miracles.
Well, don't get your hopes up, kid. It's a Hail Mary.
Not gonna kiss me, is he?
I will restrain him.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Barbara, Mark, thank you for having me here. Thanks for the introduction. And let me begin by thanking each of you for everything you do in this wonderful world of science and medicine that provides so much hope to so many. I've got a couple of moments of introductory thoughts and comments, and then I think I'll join you here for a Q&A and obviously any questions you have as well. Let me begin with kind of where are the kids today. So as we developed this life-saving enzyme replacement therapy, as I figured out what a clinical trial even is many, many years ago, we were able to, now more than 20 years ago, to treat our children, Megan and Patrick, and now thousands more children and adults living with forms of, later onset forms of Pompé disease. Megan today is 28 years old. Patrick is 27 years old. Megan went on to earn a bachelor's degree from the University of Notre Dame, a master's in social work from UNC Chapel Hill, and she's a social worker with the Make-A-Wish Foundation today, and life comes full circle. Megan was a Wish kid in 2001. Patrick, as many of you may know, is parents or grandparents now. All kids take different courses. Patrick didn't want to go to college, and we said the most important thing is meaning and purpose and fulfillment in life. And so he chose a different path, and Patrick works in a flower shop in Princeton, New Jersey. We live in New Hope, Pennsylvania, just over the river. And Patrick works in that flower shop that's staffed by all people living with disabilities. So another way to provide fulfillment in life and to give back as well. And it takes us a long way from where we were in 1998, when a doctor told us that Megan, then 15 months old, had this rare form of muscular dystrophy. And, candidly, it was, I finished the business school here in 97, and after some time in the military and practiced law for a couple of years, finally thought we had life kind of charted out for us. By about a year of age, though, as Eileen was pregnant with our third, we realized Megan wasn't pulling up in the crib, wasn't taking those first steps. And so we began what actually was a fairly short diagnostic journey, going from pediatrician to neurologist, from blood tests to scan to deep muscle biopsy. And the doctor told us they were finding this sticky form of sugar, glycogen, in the lysosome, one cellular compartment, in all muscles: skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, breathing muscle, the esophagus, smooth muscle. And I remember, honestly, our greatest fear at that point, when we had the meeting with the neurologist and a social worker and a grief counselor, our greatest fear was that we'd be told that Megan may never walk. But what he told us was much more difficult. He said, Megan had this rare disease, Pompé disease. Eileen and I, my wife and I, are silent carriers, like all of us in this room are, for any number of genetic diseases. And in the family of diseases that where Pompé lies, there's only a 1 in 4 chance that any of our children would inherit both copies of the defective gene. And that she would become very sick very quickly, and she wouldn't live to be a couple of years old. And I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do. And then he looked down at Patrick, just 7 days old, in his car carrier, and said he needs to be tested too. There's a 1 in 4 chance he may have the disease. Thankfully, we have an older son, John, who was about 3 at the time, who does not have Pompé. John lives with high-functioning autism, and we kid around, he's more work than Megan and Patrick ever were combined. John's now 30 and married, which gives us our 2 grandchildren, Stella and Scarlett. But it's that diagnosis, and many times just in this city of Boston, let alone around the world, people are going to get news. And they'll go through the shock, the grief, the denial, whether it's a parent with Alzheimer's, a spouse with cancer, or a child with a rare genetic disease. And they're going to look for hope. When we first got into this journey, it was those first 2 years, and the kids did get very, very sick and required wheelchairs and feeding tubes and ventilators. And, Megan spent, by 2 years of age, 7 weeks in an intensive care unit. And all of a sudden, in the course of that year for our family, we went from 2 seemingly healthy young children to having 2 children, again, requiring ventilators to breathe, wheelchairs to move, nurses in and out of the house. It was an inflection point in life, to say the least. And it really set us on, I think, a course of determination for us determined first to learn everything we could about this disease that we knew nothing about, and then to find anybody we could who could offer some measure of hope. And I scoured the world. It was kind of my nights and weekends on the phone and traveling to conferences, learning everything I could. I was not a scientist or a physician. I kid around that it's true. I got a 19 on my organic chemistry final at the Naval Academy, so I chose maybe a different path. But we had to learn science and learn medicine. And we found a handful of researchers in Europe at Duke University and at the University of Oklahoma. And I share this story, and you guys know it well, but I share it whether I'm in Capitol Hill, at the White House, wherever it may be, to remind people that in so many ways, our hope began in academic research centers. And so with that one doctor in Oklahoma, he wanted to start a little biotech company. And I thought that was a great idea. That's how we're going to move the science forward, and I was going to help him find a CEO. Well, the doctor portrayed by Harrison Ford had $37,000 in seed capital, 3 employees, hadn't yet licensed the technology, hadn't treated a mouse, and was based in Oklahoma City. So he was out to find a world-class CEO, and the best he could do was me at 31 years old. And so, again, with the notion of being determined, but also not ever wanting to look back and wished we had done something more. So I was working at Bristol Myers at the time. We were back east and just trying to take care of some special kids in a very unique family and trying to build some semblance of a career in the industry, but finally walked away from that to start this company. It was after that seed capital that he had, which was his life savings. We took a home equity loan, about $100,000, to start the company, and when that ran out, we were thankfully funded next by the prestigious venture capital firms of Visa and MasterCard. So you are not an entrepreneur in biotech unless you've taken a cash advance to pay payroll. But then finally, we did attract a small amount of venture capital, and we reached a point where we were having positive results, promising results in animals. But I realized that we needed the horsepower of a much larger biotech company to drive this forward. After many discussions and many flights from the West Coast to the East Coast, and we had 2 term sheets, one from Genentech for a 50-50 global partnership, and they would buy 20% of the company. I think it was over $100 million into the business, with the first original biotech company and a company with remarkable leadership in science, and we'd stay independent. The other offer was from Henry Tremere, one of my great mentors, and some of you may have known Henry, many of you may have heard of him or read about him, the founder of Genzyme and somebody who grew a remarkable company, now part of Sanofi. And Henry wanted to acquire our business. And we had many, many conversations and negotiations, and finally I realized that it was Genzyme, with their focus on rare diseases, with their resources, their manufacturing, and their clinical trial capabilities around the world in very difficult small diseases, that we would partner with and be acquired with. And so I went to Genzyme and ran that program for a while, and there was lots of drama of getting our kids treated as well, and some of that's portrayed accurately in the film. But again, eventually what it led to is a treatment that saved our kids' lives. And in Pompé disease, yes, the skeletal muscles are weak, but for young children, it's the heart muscle, the cardiac muscle that they would typically die from. So heart failure. By the time Megan and Patrick were treated, their left ventricular hypertrophy, the left side of their heart, they were about 3 times enlarged. Cardiac function was compromised. They told us by that point that they had 6, maybe 12 months to live. And thankfully, within 6 infusions, their hearts remodeled. The function went back to normal, and it stayed that way forever. For a while, particularly with our Megan, skeletal muscle strength improved dramatically. And after about a year, it plateaued and then started a slow regression. I was naive enough to think that, we had done this. We did it for a couple of years. It was my foray into science and medicine. We got the kids a medicine. Young kids will be cured. Older kids' lives will be saved. But I came to realize something, that what we do in medicine, rarely is it that silver bullet where you've got a cure and we all move on to the next disease. It's a medicine that can make a meaningful difference, hopefully, extend and enhance life, give people time with the people they love, but also give all of us in this room time time to come up with the next best idea, to obsolete the first technology, the second, the third that we develop, until someday there is a cure for the disease. For most diseases, we're not there, but we're moving forward. And so we're at this inflection point, and I wanted to share a little bit about our personal journey because it informs how I think about this industry. We went on after that first company to found Amicus Therapeutics. The first company was called Novozyme. In 2005, we founded Amicus, realizing that 95% of rare diseases have no treatment. And we wanted to create an enduring, lasting, sustained company and focus on many, many rare diseases. And we did that, and it was not an easy journey. We struggled in the clinic, we struggled with regulatory, we managed through the great financial crisis, we managed through our own setbacks, we managed because through times where science was just so hard, managed through COVID, and eventually developed medicines, including a second-generation medicine that our kids are on today, that looks to be profoundly more effective and gives another treatment option for people living with Pompé disease. In fact, most kids born today who are diagnosed at or near birth, early in life, receive this lifelong enzyme replacement therapy. Most live normal, healthy lives. And you kind of think about, what you do for a living. We have tough days at work. What we do is really, really hard. We could build the greatest buildings and research centers. We could raise millions or billions of dollars for our research. We can hire Nobel laureates, world-class researchers, but still almost everything we try, it doesn't work. But when it does, I still think it's one of the best jobs you can have. And so for me, as I retired a couple of years ago from Amicus and was approached about this opportunity to run Bio and to help shape the ecosystem for everything that it takes to make newer and better medicines, I thought this would be a great part of our life's journey. And I think in many ways, and probably is for many of you, you kind of move from a job to a career to a bit of a vocation. And so for Bio, these are indeed interesting times. There are many, many threats. There are also many, many opportunities as well. What we try to do is to shape this in terms of innovation and access. And I'll just offer a couple thoughts there, and then happy to sit down and get a little bit more deeply maybe into some of the plans, programs, policies, either threats or opportunities. But when we began, as I began about a year and a half ago into this role, I laid out 7 core strategic priorities. I'm not taking you through any of them except the first 2. The first is to protect and advance the virtuous circle of innovation. And we call it that because it is a circle. And we come full circle, and along the way, there's a lot of attrition. And again, when you get to the top of the circle and you've succeeded, you've gone from an idea to a molecule to an approved medicine. That's not only a rare feat in our industry, it's one of the most rare things and difficult things you can do in any industry. And again, rarely do we stop there. We go back and we do it again with the patient at the center of that circle. But I describe for policymakers, lawmakers in Washington, what this circle is. And when I do that, I say almost always it starts with great academic research. I'm blessed to be a trustee at both the Naval Academy and at Notre Dame, and I get to see what great university research is at that level, but also having worked in this industry now for more than 25 years, that is the foundation of all great science. And the model of academic research, startup entrepreneurs, startup capital, spin-out companies, tech transfer. That's what's so unique about this business. And while it was born in the United States, it's a global enterprise today, still driven by the great research here in the United States. So we talk about academic research as the foundation of this circle. And then we talk about the NIH and the role that it plays, not just the research at its campus in Maryland, but the ecosystem that it drives, the research grants. What is the NIH and what it does? And then we talk about the startup companies. More than half of all new medicines originated in startup biotechnology companies. So we need to protect and advance that ecosystem as well. And then you move on to medium-sized companies, sometimes larger companies like we did in partnering with Genzyme. You work with consultants, advisors, law firms, banks, small and angel investors. You work with venture investors, public markets. You think about contract research organizations, contract manufacturers, everything, everyone who's part of this circle. And when any part of that circle is threatened, that's what we need to advocate for and educate. So innovation, protecting, advancing the virtuous circle of innovation is so core to what we do. The other thing that we've talked about, and again, in no particular order, but on an equal basis, is access. Ensuring that people have access to our medicines, whether it's education, awareness, the ability to enroll in our clinical trials, whether it's to participate in expanded access programs later in development, and then once drugs are approved, to make sure that nobody ever goes a day without the medicines they need. And so we're developing plans and programs at Bio to maintain, advance everything that we need to do in access. Many years ago, many of you may remember, it was signed into law by President Obama at the end of 2016, the 21st Century Cures Act, championed by Republicans and Democrats, took years to develop. It's a great piece of legislation, then law, that really helped with the innovation side of what we do. I think, and we'll be talking more in the months ahead, that it's time for a 21st Century Access Act. There's never been a greater time for science and medicine. We've got a lot of challenges, and we can talk about those. There's never been a greater time. When I entered into this world, again, it took me 2 years to find 3 researchers in the world who knew anything about Pompé disease. Today, I could name 30 in academia, 6 companies working on it, 3 approved medicines, and go down the list of whatever the disease may be, of cancer, of rare diseases, neuroscience, autoimmune diseases. So we've got the potential. We're seeing more and more of these therapies that are going to transform human health in a very positive way. But we will have failed if everyone doesn't have access to it. I think it was Janet Woodcock a couple of years ago, speaking at a conference when she was at the FDA, who said that until we reach the day that that person living under a bridge has access to the most state-of-the-art CAR T therapies, we will have failed. So we think about the economic barriers. We think about out-of-pocket costs, co-insurance, co-pays. I think the social contract is failing. We pay our health insurance premiums where we can't afford, they're paid for us, and we're provided access to health care, including for our medicines. And then we're required to have skin in the game. That's an old relic. Who in the world has looked up their health plan, saw that they have low or no deductible, and said, "Hey, I'm really healthy, but I'm going to try that chemotherapy. So let me see if my doc will write me a script." It doesn't work. People with cancer, rare diseases, whatever the ailment may be, they've got enough skin in the game for them to have to worry about co-insurance, co-pays. When we talk about the price of drugs, price of medicines, there is a lot of complexity to the system that we have to fix that'll reduce costs. Importing socialized price controls is probably not the answer. But we do have a problem when people go to the counter at their pharmacy and the pharmacist rings it up and says, "I need your credit card, it's a $500 copay," and they can't afford it, and they walk away without their medicine. So we're going to look and partner, and I get a lot of support, a lot of interest when we begin floating this idea over the last couple of months on Capitol Hill. And by very, very bipartisan and bicameral as well. So there's some great hope that we can really reform the economics of how we pay for medicines. And the other side are the systemic barriers, the challenges to access that come oftentimes from medical insurance plans, where there are prior authorizations, step edits, utilization management that limit access. When I go out and describe for laypersons, you're all familiar with this world, but when I describe to laypersons access and step edits, that you could be diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. Doctor can evaluate you, spend countless hours with you, in his or her medical judgment, write a prescription for what they think is the best medicine to treat your disorder. And oftentimes today it's treated like a recommendation to a medical director at an insurance company. And you wait days or weeks, and sometimes they'll come back in this world of step edits and say, "Well, we're going to deny that. We'll approve this medicine. You'll probably do okay on it. If you don't, come back to us, ask us again, and then maybe you'll get access to that next medicine." That's wrong. and we need to fix that as well. And when I talk to CEOs at our large pharma companies and CEOs of some of the large insurers, they realize this problem. And there's a willingness to come up with a solution and to pay for a solution as well. So that's part of what we need to do at Bio, is to bring that whole ecosystem together to identify problems and come up with solutions. So with that, those are kind of my opening comments. I think you guys wanted to have a little bit of a Q&A. I'm happy to get into tariffs, MFN. Certainly, hopefully, we'll talk about the FDA and some of what's going on there. I spend a lot of time with the commissioner and his senior staff as well. But again, thank you for listening. Thanks for this opportunity, and we'll have a chance to talk now.
Really wonderful opening remarks and lots to think about. And thank you for sharing your story as well as sort of your vision. Do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start. John, thank you. That was inspiring and great. We really appreciate your being here. This is sort of a meta level question. You told the story of incredible success after a great deal of effort and investment, personal investment and monetary investment in this particular in treatment for this particular disease, which has affected your family. And it's inspiring. It's wonderful. I think that everybody in this room who's part of the ecosystem understands the significance of it and completely empathizes with what you did and what happened. But the pharma industry itself and the biotech industry is slammed all the time in the press about prices, about alleged corporate greed, about looking the other way for adverse effects of approved medicines. And we sit there and when I say we, I mean the industry just takes it in most cases and doesn't really articulate anything back. And I wonder, in your experience, what do you think biopharma and the individual companies can do differently to change the perception of the American public about the ethics of the industry?
Yeah, I think a couple of points I'll make there, and you're absolutely right, too. If you go back to the early 1990s, do you know what the most admired company in America was? It wasn't Apple or Google. It was Merck for 4 years in a row, the most admired company in America, and the most admired CEO was Roy Vagelos, the Merck CEO. And you think about all the great things that a company like Merck had done, particularly what they did with river blindness and their philanthropic and tremendous efforts they put into that. And then you can almost trace the decline. I think it hit its bottom about 6 years ago, right before COVID, where the Harris every year does a survey of institutions, businesses, government, academia, and pharma was at the bottom, 11% approval rating. And so how did we get there? Frankly, we got there through some bad actions. We got there from some bad behaviors. You had the extremes. You had the Martin Shkreli's of the world and others. You had, some of what was going on with whether it be EpiPen or insulin, the headline stories as well. You had, sometimes there were medicines that were incredibly great medicines that helped a number of people. And then you saw companies, overly aggressive with extending the life cycle and patents. You saw a system that was so complex, it rewarded more expensive medicines, even when they had gone generic. So I think all of those actions came to bear. And at the end of the day, politically, it polls really, really well. And so you get tremendous support, traditionally from Democrats and independents, but now it crosses the political divide. And you see it on the right end of the spectrum as well as the left. So 2 things we can do. One are change our actions. And so stop being defensive all the time. Stop trying to change or any good ideas that may come forward. So when we talk about where are people struggling, I think if we came forward, when people talk about the cost of medicines, they have no idea, and nor should they. Know at an average wholesale price, plus minus 6%, to PBM, the channels. It's so confusing, most of us don't understand it. And the complexity is intentional by many of the folks in this whole ecosystem, where more than half of all the economics of a drug go into the channel to middlemen. They don't go to the innovator. So we need to reduce the complexity. That will bring down the costs of medicines. But again, for most people, it's the out-of-pocket costs and it's the denial of access. And I'm a firm believer, if we take that head on, and again, when I talk to the big pharma CEOs, they get it. Almost to a person, they get it. And they say, look, we will contribute significant margin, billions, maybe tens of billions of dollars to buy that down. Give you an example there. For Medicare, Medicaid, the government pay programs, by law, folks in those programs are not able to take advantage of copay assistance. So why in the world can somebody up to age 64 have access to a copay program, but when you turn 65, you can't? Originally it was thought to be an incentive and spur overutilization, but in a world of precision medicine, I think there are lots of ways to manage that. And that can actually be changed by a stroke of the pen from the HHS secretary. So I think if we really advocate for positive change, you'll see behaviors, you'll see people say, wow, these medicines are becoming more accessible, more affordable. The second part, I think, Mark, is on the storytelling side. We've done a very, very poor job of telling our story. Most people see our industry through DTC ads when they watch sports or the evening news, and they see people holding hands in bathtubs and music, and they're inundated with it. And I think the way we do that cheapens the science. It almost gives an image that we have so much money, we don't know what else to do but buy Super Bowl ads. And I just think that's wrong. So, I understand there's an important element of DTC and education, awareness, driving access. I get that. I've seen the data. But how, when, where we do that, I think is something we need to look at. And the other part is telling the story better. We launched a campaign this year on vaccines, a multi-million-dollar campaign on vaccines. If you get a chance, look at the website, whywevaccinate.org. And you'll see some of the still ads. We ran them on Fox News. We put a commercial together. Watch this video. It's about a minute-long video. We made it into a TV commercial. It inspires, it frightens, and it's deeply American. We tested it with folks on the conservative side of the spectrum, and it talks about the importance of vaccines, of protecting your children, protecting your family, protect your community, protect America. And it's something that has had an impact. We played it in Washington, D.C. on Fox News, and we played it in Palm Beach County, and it's had an impact. We're going to come out with another campaign next year on the 50th anniversary of the first biotech company, the founding of our industry, on what is biotech, what is biotechnology, and I think you'll find it very inspiring. It's going to tell the story of, again, an industry born out of entrepreneurship and ultimately one whose job it is to provide cures. So that's the storytelling, the individual stories, including the many stories of failure when we tried. But for many of us, we'd rather be the first to fail than the last to succeed. And I think combined with our actions, I think hopefully that will start in the quarters and years ahead to change the public view.
I want to invite anybody from the audience to also ask and engage. There is a lot we can talk about, and I want to make sure, Luther. 1 second. Behind you.
Thank you. That was really truly inspiring and informative. You spoke about the pharma industry, but on a broader level, the mistrust in science and misinformation. So 2 questions. Why does misinformation gain such immediate and lasting traction? And how are you thinking about addressing trust in science generally?
We've looked at this. We actually put together a task force made up of some, from our smallest companies to our largest companies, some experts, a task force on trust in science. And we've looked at, how did we get to where we are? Part of it is, again, the nature of social media and the economics of clicks, I hate to say. When you're scrolling through and you're looking at the news, if you saw a story, clinical trial confirms efficacy of vaccines. Okay, probably not going to click on it. If you see Tylenol causes autism, or vaccines cause autism, data shows, which it doesn't, people click on that and they listen, and there's lots of disinformation. And there are ways to counter that as well. There's also realizing, I think a tipping point for us in the trust in science was in COVID. And it's a shame too, what we did, what the whole ecosystem did coming together, including our largest companies and the government and Operation Warp Speed. What we did, I looked back at some of the early videos and some of the smartest people in the room. Bill Gates, at the end of February 2020, talked about a vaccine. He said, there's no way we could do this in less than 4 or 5 years. Well, we did it. And we did it with mRNA technology. And you all know the story of COVID. And then, unfortunately, it became politicized on both ends of the spectrum as well, too. And we made mistakes. I think we overpromised, based on the data we had and the knowledge we had at the time, we overpromised what COVID vaccines can do. The data clearly showed it would dramatically reduce hospitalizations and deaths. It didn't really prevent you from getting COVID, and I think that was part of the mistake we made, but so be it. What we've never done, though, is to go back and say, hey, look, this is what we did. This is what we learned. These are the mistakes we made. And next time, we're going to be even better prepared, and here's where we are. So much of that, when we do the data tracking, the focus groups, kind of goes back to people's uncertainty over COVID vaccines, generally positive view, but I think that was a bit of a tipping point as well. So there's no one factor to all of that, but I think a lot of that brings us to where we are. But ultimately, too, the level of trust in science is actually quite high. And I think when you look at it, I think we're at the bottom in terms of the vaccine hesitancy as well, and we do a lot of work in research here as well. I think we're at the bottom because I think a lot of these stories have kind of played their course. I think we'll start to see a reversal ahead in the vaccine hesitancy for a couple of reasons. One is the data and science are overwhelmingly on our side. Secondly, and we've had these discussions, the president is not an anti-vaxxer. He takes pride in Operation Warp Speed. He's been vaccinated. In his first term, he came out and did PSAs on flu and pneumonia vaccines for senior citizens. His family around him are not anti-vaxxers. So I think there'll be some natural political wall there as well. And ultimately, too, I think the political influence of others who have a different view on vaccines will begin to wane.
Others? Yeah, Sylvia.
Thank you so much for being here today. I have a question from the online audience, so I'm partly moderating that as well. When you advocate for a 21st Century Access Act, do you include right to try as a legitimate option for pre-approval access? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we did not support the Right to Try Act. We think the principle of broad access, as early access as possible, makes sense. We think it starts to be challenging, of course, when you get into making it a right to take a clinical trial medicine that may not yet be ready in a company's judgment, scientific judgment. What we focus on instead is trying to educate our companies on when is it appropriate and how can you think about being as aggressive as possible with expanded access, early access. And there are good principles. I had a principle at Amicus that we always had that before we treated a single patient in a phase 1 or 2 study, we had to have our expanded access policy in writing. And we would work with a patient advisory board to develop that. And we did. I remember we were in the midst of our phase 3 study in adults. This was 6 years ago. It was October of 2019, and I got an email. And it was from a couple in Germany. They spoke English, and they talked about their young son, a little boy named Jaspar, who was on a competitor product, a first-generation product, and had failed it. He was about a year old. He was in the hospital, almost needed to be ventilated on oxygen. His heart was profoundly enlarged. He was taking 4 times the dose, labeled dose of that approved medicine. And our policy said we wouldn't treat children until we saw the data in adults. And we were about 6 or 8 months from seeing that data. It's a good chance that child wouldn't have lived to that point. And you get that video message. They sent it with a picture of the little boy holding a sign that said, "Please help me." And so you talk about as a parent, just breaks your heart. And so you step back. And I asked our team, we got together, we shared it. I said, look, guys, I know all the reasons we probably shouldn't do this, but if I make the decision to do this, how are we going to do it and how quickly can we do it? And they came back within 48 hours, came up with a plan. We went through all the known risks, including that the child may succumb to the disease, and we'd have to report that publicly. But within 2 weeks, we got the medicine there. Within 8 weeks, his heart remodeled. He came off oxygen. Within 3 months, was discharged to the hospital. He's now in first grade in kindergarten. And my prior company, Amicus, has done that now dozens of times with compassionate use. Didn't do it because we were mandated by law. We did it because we thought it was the right thing. We had a very forward-looking view, and we're maybe a little progressive on this thought, but we took a very human view of it, and I think that's what we can encourage the industry to do.
Missy?
Hi. Thank you so much for your presentation and your thoughts. I want to build a little bit on what Mark spoke about at the beginning, and also Luther in this age of sort of misinformation, disinformation. I agree with you completely around improving the way we tell our story and we explain drug development and how we run global clinical research to advance science. And I think these campaigns are terrific. They also feel a bit one way. And so I'm wondering, from your perspective, what are ways in which, or what are the opportunities for us to engage in more of these really challenging discussions where we can say to people, thank you for asking us that question, let's talk about it. Because I think you're right in terms of how defensive we can sometimes be and how silent we can be. And so to create environments where we can actually have discussions, even when they're difficult and we need to be more vulnerable, I think are increasingly important. And so would love to get your thoughts on what those opportunities could look like, or what are those opportunities for individual life science companies to engage in that space. Thank you.
Yes, thanks for that. We do a fair amount. We need to do a lot more, I think, is the answer. One of the things, while Bio is based in Washington, D.C., we've got a staff of about 150 people. We realize that, like all politics is local, all biotech is local. And so we've been getting out. I've got a program called Bio on the American Road. We've been out to about a dozen cities. While I come to Boston a lot and San Francisco, this is getting to the next tier of cities that are emerging centers for biomedical research. Some of them incredibly well-grounded in a biotech ecosystem and in academic centers. So the Atlantas, the Indianapolises, Denvers, Houston, Dallas, those cities as well. And when we're there, we meet with academic leaders, we meet with small company CEOs, we meet with hospital CEOs, we meet with governors, we meet with state representatives, we do patient roundtables, and invariably, while not directed toward people who may have different views and may not broadly call it trust in science, we do meet with people who are skeptical either of the industry or on underlying science. This came up in one of the cities we were in with mRNA technology. People just were misinformed as to what it was. What you cannot do is get 3 doctors in white coats to stand up at a podium and to explain science and tell them why they're wrong. You've got to listen, you've got to engage, you've got to give them examples of how it's worked. You tell the story of entrepreneurs, the story of failures, and what it really is. It makes a difference. We need to do a lot more of that to take it out of the pure policymaking realm as well. And there's lots of medium we can do that. We just hired a couple of folks full-time who do social media. We hadn't really done much of that at Bio before. So kind of the Instagram type stories, and my kids laugh at me because I don't even know the names, like Snapchat and stuff like this too. So we need to do more of that. But engaging with people here, and we do it with policymakers too. I'll sit down with the secretary. I'll sit down with senior members of the administration, explain whatever the issue may be, and the most important part is doing it with a level of respect and building on relationships. Find common ground, like with the secretary wanting to advance cell and gene therapy, wanting to advance programs for rare diseases. So I think it takes time, takes relationship building, and it takes storytelling. And it takes each of you as well. There's only so much I or we or our member companies can do.
Yes. 1 second, Teresa first, and then, yeah.
So, John, thank you for sharing your personal story as a mother. aside from my professional life, it's really very touching. And I think about the sense of urgency. The clock was ticking for you and the sense of urgency in which you should work. You did work, and I think it's a reminder to all of us that the sense of urgency must be with all of us, because we don't know when we'll be touched by a disease that could impact us or our family. You had a different approach because you had to, but I think all of us need to remember that. I have two quick comments. One is working for a small biotech company with only one product. Of course, funding is an issue, but when I think about the gap between the end of a trial, especially a phase 3 trial, even if you have the funds to do an open label extension, there is a very long time before the pricing and all of that is set, before that drug is available on the shelves at a pharmacy. And I think that patients, feel that gap, not only people that were in the trial, but all the people that can potentially benefit. So my first part of the question is, what can we do about that, closing that gap? Because I think there are political drivers, especially in this current environment, that are creating that gap and extending it. And then the second is that the overall length of time to get through the phases of the study, if by overhauling the entire system, are there talks about that where more adaptive designs where we don't have those breaks between phase 1, 2, and 3 so that the patients do have access much sooner?
No, those are incredibly important points. And we talk about, I work with a lot of our emerging companies. We've had a good couple of months. We're starting to see some tailwinds. You've got the macro effect of interest rates coming down. You've got, the fact that we got overextended when money was free in 2020, 2021, when the hurdle rate was 0%. Every investment looked great. And so we ended up with companies that went public that never should have gone public, technologies that probably should have stayed in academia longer. We've worked through a lot of that. You're starting to see some M&A come back, which gets the interest of more investors, including the generalist investors, not just biotech specific. So some of those macro factors. But the most important thing we can do to drive capital into our industry, particularly our emerging companies, is to reduce the cost, time, complexity, and inconsistency of the entire clinical trials paradigm and the regulatory review and approval process. That's the single most important thing we can do. And here we do get great alignment. We get great alignment from the administration, at FDA, from Congress, and again, bipartisan. People get it, particularly when we describe it in this context of the global rivalry with China and the rise of Chinese biotechnology, that is a national security imperative. And that was one of my 7 priorities when I came in, is to advocate for biotechnology as a national security imperative. That we believe the world is a healthier, safer, better, more prosperous place when the United States and our allies lead in biotechnology. There's probably little we can do to stop biotechnology in China, and I don't think that should be our focus. I think the focus should be to look inside and to think about how can we be more competitive. And so there we've got a whole series. I've got in my folder here, just for notes to remind myself, a plan that we'll release next week. We shared it in person with the commissioner and his senior team a couple of weeks ago. We've kept them informed of this along the way. It's based on hundreds of interviews, listening sessions, and the title of it is Strengthening America's Biotech Future, Strategies for Enhancing the FDA as the Global Gold Standard. But the number one thing it says here is reduce the cost and complexity of early drug development. So it's every end of the spectrum. And I can tell you, I've got a lot of confidence in the commissioner. We've spent a lot of time together. I believe he gets it. He said that, look, we're going to make mistakes, and there have been mistakes made along the way. We've got a good dialogue to try to highlight what some of those issues are, and we're putting in place a formal process where monthly we'll provide kind of a summary update of everything we see and hear in the industry, where people got CRLs, where they had a bad set of meeting minutes, whatever it may be. So there's a lot that the FDA can do to influence clinical trials and the requirements. For instance, I know, and the commissioner has shared, that they're taking a very hard look at how we do clinical trials, or how they do it in Australia, and the requirements to get into the clinic. We've grown to the point where to get to the open IND just takes too long. The requirements are too overly burdensome. So what can we do to reduce that? And I think we'll see new guidances in the months ahead from the FDA. I think, too, when we think about what's not necessarily within the purview of FDA, but influence of many of you and of the institutions we work with, Again, we've got the greatest academic centers for medical research in the world here in the United States, many in this city. But I can tell you, as an entrepreneur, I knew exactly generally what I needed to do to get in the clinic, to get that open IND, and how long it would take. And then for even severe rare diseases, it was about a year to actually begin the clinical studies. All of the contracts, the IRBs, the reviews, every one of them different templates, formats. We'd have armies of people dealing with that, plus what we had to deal with outside the United States as well. We need to come together in this ecosystem and figure out better ways. Centralized IRBs, standardized contracts, informed consent forms that maintain integrity and a high global standard for safety and efficacy to make sure we protect patients, but we advance research. So that's on that end of the spectrum, and then everything we do to go forward, and this is heavily within the influence of the agency. You mentioned adaptive clinical studies. So adaptive clinical studies, Bayesian statistics, real-world evidence, natural history studies, it's talked about a lot, and we used to talk about it a lot, and I remember our second-generation Pompé drug, having conversations about that, but just couldn't get the agency kind of over the hump to say, okay, you treated 40 or so patients in a phase 2, the data are clear, the biologic pathway is understood, safety looks good, and the default is go do a global clinical trial randomized at the standard of care with a 6-minute walk test. And now in the end, they worked with us to approve the medicine, so I give them great credit for that. Although in the end, we were delayed about 2 years for approval because the drug was manufactured at a plant in China that had been inspected multiple times, that the EMA said physical inspection could be a post-approval commitment. They'll do a paper inspection. For 2 years, we waited for somebody to go inspect that plant, and the inspection turned out fine. How many people suffered there? Yeah. So this is part of what we're doing. Others are doing it. Michael Milken and the Milken Foundation are taking the lead on this at their Faster Cures conference in a couple of weeks. In early November, they'll release their ideas and their plans. So you're starting to see the ecosystem come together. I travel around the country. I was with the CEO of MD Anderson a couple of weeks ago in Houston, see what they do there. And I think we could share best practices. So we have to reduce the cost, time, complexity. And as I share in Washington, otherwise we will lose this great industry to China.
Thank you. Maybe while you're talking about the FDA, you could talk a little bit about what you see as happening in the FDA. You talk about it very positively at the commissioner level, and we appreciate that. But it seems like many of the staff and the folks have left, and it's not really clear how to be predictive of what their course will be. What insights can you offer?
It is, from a people standpoint, Marty, Dr. McCary got into a really difficult situation when he came in. We all remember Doge. So as that was going on, our primary job was to protect as much of the FDA as we could. So ultimately, we advocated very strongly in the White House and elsewhere, protect the reviewers, protect the inspectors from these non-strategic, we'll call them, cuts. And they were protected, but the morale was shaken. They were understaffed, under-resourced. I think somebody who had no idea how the FDA works, looks at an org chart and says, well, you got all these policy shops, why do you need these? Having no idea what they actually do. Who in the world is going to draft the guidances without the policy teams? Having the leadership, I had worked very closely and am friends with Peter Marks. Peter was a great leader for industry, for patients, for the public health, great representative of government. Mm-hmm. Politically, he was not going to survive because of differences with a senior member of the administration. So with that, Dr. McCary inherited a very, very difficult ship. The loss of leadership, all those different factors. I think you've started to see some strengthening. I think Dr. Tidmarsh, George Tidmarsh, coming in as the CEDAR director, has provided a steady hand in leadership. He is a lifelong, not only physician, but career entrepreneur in biotech, brings a very strong and pragmatic view. He's got to rebuild parts of that organization. You're seeing at the FDA pivoting of programs, some beginning to evolve from CBER over to CEDAR, and I think we'll see more of that in the future. On the people side, though, Dr. McCary realized that they were understaffed. They didn't have the expertise as well. So he advocated with the administration and got, I believe, the only waiver to the government hiring freeze, and early in the summer was authorized to hire 1,000 new scientists at the FDA. Got that, began to get the resumes in over the first 30 days or so, made 50 hires, and then somebody filed a lawsuit. It all got stopped around some HR questions. That was just resolved a couple of weeks ago, so they now have the green light to hire. Commissioner shared with me last week they have 17,000 resumes for the 950 positions. So I do think that you'll start to see an increase in the number and quality, hopefully, of the staff as well. Another area that the commissioner is focused on that we really spend a lot of time advocating on as well is changing the nature of communications at FDA. Think about what we did during Warp Speed. Nobody said, hey, I have a vaccine. I'm going to submit for a type whatever meeting, and hopefully in 30 or 60 days, maybe we'll get together and I'll get some pre-meeting comments from the FDA that will be largely unintelligible, and then we'll meet, and then I'll get meeting minutes that will be confusing as well, and we'll need another meeting to clarify that. Just change all of that. What did we do during Warp Speed? We did it as a partnership, respecting the independence and integrity of the regulators, driven by science and data. So one of the changes I think you'll see coming from the FDA, and the commissioner said I'm free to share this. I don't know if it's public yet or not, but when you get your meeting minutes, particularly for small emerging companies, you oftentimes have a question, or there was something just wrong in it that they got wrong, and there's no recourse. Yeah, maybe you could pick up the phone and the project manager or the medical lead will talk with you, but they don't have to, and oftentimes are reluctant to. They're going to put a process in place at the FDA very shortly where you now have, when you get your meeting minutes, you have the ability to have an email exchange with the team at the FDA to clarify anything in the minutes that is unclear or that you're unsatisfied with as well. So baby steps to get there, but again, I think hopefully we'll have more tailwinds in terms of a modernized, reformed, and ultimately strengthened FDA.
Thank you. Lori? And then Diana.
Thank you so much. As the parent of a young adult who had over 100 non-well visits before she was 3, I could very much relate. So personally, thank you just very much for your vulnerability in sharing this. I have the honor of leading health literacy strategy and innovation at Merck, and have a question around the 21st Century Access Act. Of course, I love it. But when I think about access, I also think about health literacy. We can have this incredible medicine. We get it somehow that it's reasonable and a person can access it. But if a person does not understand their disease, does not understand potentially how that medicine can benefit them, how to take it, how to participate in a clinical trial with informed consent, of course, is a trust barrier, potential risks of that medicine, what to do if they happen, then really the value of our innovation is lost to many people, despite having these incredible medicines and access. And I just wonder how you're thinking about health literacy in the context of this act, and I'm obviously happy to talk further about it as well. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think that should be an important part of it. So it wouldn't, while the foundation of it may be looking at economic barriers, systemic insurance barriers, I think there's other pieces of, and that's one great idea that we'd love to build upon. And Merck is a great Bio member, and Yanni and Rob Davis are very actively engaged at Bio, so I'll make sure we follow up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Diana, did you have a question? Okay. Others? Yeah, Sylvia online.
I have a few more online questions.
Good.
So one of them is a little bit more internationally focused around what your plans are to accelerate biotechnology's innovation to Africa to make medicine and innovation accessible with diverse populations and global populations.
No, it's a great question. It gets to the nature of what we do, right? The notion of global access for everybody, the world being a better, healthier place with more medicines and driven by our science research, our great companies. You look at demographics. You know, China today, I believe, has 1.4 billion people. By the end of this century, they're projected to have about a third of that. Mm-hmm. And you look at Western Europe, you look at the United States. If we don't solve our immigration challenges and bring more people into the United States safely, then we are going to be doomed by the nature of our demographics. The only continent, the only region that's not is Africa, growing dramatically. So in terms of its economic influence, its political influence, and the number of people and the needs of its people. I think that's something that we need to chart a course forward with. Yes, we've had, PEPFAR, the PEPFAR program that most of you are familiar with, and what it did to effectively end the AIDS crisis in Africa, and maybe the greatest legacy of President Bush. Those are part of the ideas and principles that I think we can advance, but it's got to be beyond that. It's got to be actually integrating with the system as the academic centers mature there, as the healthcare systems hopefully mature. And again, with Africa, and I spent a fair amount of time in the military and in parts of Africa, and there are, just orders of magnitude differences in the economic advancement, the societal advancement, the level of democratization or absence of it in Africa. So it's there's many, many political challenges, as we all know. We did studies in South Africa. We had clinical trial sites in Egypt. Was really the extent of what we did, and some compassionate use in Africa. But I think as an industry, we can come up with a longer-term plan for how we address that.
Thank you.
So while you're talking about representation in research, one of the things that we've worried about is how to, keep the light alive, to make sure that the drugs and products are studied in the people who have or are predicted to have the condition or disease. And it seems that that is less of a focus now than it used to be. And I wonder how we can approach that to make sure that we're inclusive of all the varying subpopulations that need to be studied to make sure those drugs and products are safe and effective in that population.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it gets to diversity in clinical trials, which is an important principle going forward. And even, in this world where, you don't say DE&I, this is not what that is. This is not about, it's a different conversation about, workforce diversity. This is about advancing science and medicine, extending and enhancing people's lives, understudied groups, whether they're specific racial groups, African Americans, Latinos, people who are geographically isolated from their medicines, people living in Appalachia, for instance, let alone when you get outside the United States. And then you get to women, and the fact that there is such underinvestment in women's health care as well. When, the vast majority of people living with autoimmune diseases are women, beyond just the women-specific diseases, the gynecological and other disorders or cancers. So we spend a lot of time thinking about that as well, advancing medicine for women, for many of you, or your wives or daughters, granddaughters. So that's an important principle as well.
Yeah, Sylvia.
Sorry, it seems like I'm hogging, but I'm speaking for the people online.
You guys have a lot of questions for a Wednesday morning. Yeah, rainy
Busy
Wednesday.
morning over here. So this one is kind of interesting. It's about whether you see any room in biotech for preventative healthcare work. The question writer, Casey, writes, she thinks a large part of the Make America Healthy Again movement is frustrated with the reactive approach and understandably want more work to avoid the health issues in the first place.
Look at GLP-1s, right? People, most people aren't aware. When I talk to my cousins or other folks, they're like, hey, what do you think of this Ozempic thing or whatever it may be? And I don't advocate for any one particular medicine, but, I'll say, hey, look, these are really important medicines. And yeah, you could lose weight, and that has certain health benefits, of course. But you look at the data for these medicines and, what seem to be the anti-inflammatory aspects, the ability to prevent a whole cascade of events that could lead to a range of disorders well beyond the more traditional metabolic syndromes associated with being overweight or obese. The fact that they're being studied in diseases like Alzheimer's, addiction disorders. This could be, one of the greatest revolutions in medicine. And now you see, how many companies are involved in developing GLP-1s or associated technologies as well. So much of that can get to the prevention of medicine. Kind of gets back to our image as an industry. And, as many of you know, medicines account for about 15% of healthcare costs. Out-of-pocket expenses for people are about 1% of healthcare costs. There is no of everything we do, surgery, lifestyle, nutrition, hygiene, whatever it may be, there's been no greater contributor to human longevity and wellness than the medicines that we've invented. And how many of them provide the wellness to prevent disease? If it's a human genetic disease and, a Pompé or whatever it may be, you gotta treat that. You gotta cure that mistake of nature. You gotta do it with great urgency. But increasingly, I think we'll have the power and the tools to really, in a very positive way, fundamentally change life. To think about how can you intervene at the earliest stages before plaques build up, before there's any signs of cognitive decline in Alzheimer's. This is about preventative medicine, the ability to not only control and cure disease, but to prevent. And I think we need to do a better job at telling that story. And I think with more and more technologies, we'll be able to do that.
So I realize we're short on time now, and I can't believe how the hour has flown. I just want to ask you one final question, which is how can we, as the MRCT Center, Research and Policy Center at Harvard and the Brigham, how can this community help you in your efforts?
Oh, you guys are in the trenches,
Yeah.
Working on designing these clinical trials. You touch every part of that virtuous circle. So to think about, what can we do, again, to reduce specifically the cost, time, complexity of clinical trials, and to be bold in that thinking and to try to spread it as far and wide as you can.
Thank you. Well, thank you
Great,
so
thank you.
much.
Good luck
This
to
was
each of you.
just
Thank you
terrific.
again for everything you do.